Hey Miguel and Mar, if you're listening. Today's Sunday, February 8th, 2026, and today your Aunt Becca and I went to a basketball game and we got to see heated rivals, which my favorite team, the Ohio State Buckeyes, played your dad's favorite, or maybe second favorite team, the University of Michigan Wolverines. And the Wolverines whooped my Buckeyes today pretty bad. It was a lot of fun, and we had a great time at the game. And we got to see a kid named Ade Mara, who was a junior from Zaragoza, Spain. And he was the MVP of the game and high scorer. He scored 24 points, and it was the most he'd ever scored in his career. And he really stood out on the court because he was 7 feet 3 inches tall, and he had a couple of alley oops and ran the court, and he was a lot of fun to watch. But I think your dad might have liked watching him more than I did today. So, anyway, it's still cold and snowy out here. We're a little below zero. And anyway, it was a fun day. So, I'm going to pick back up where we left off. Chapter 3, Clue Hunting. What's the matter? Joe asked, puzzled. The stern-looking man did not answer. He merely motioned with his head for Frank to accompany him. At the same time, he took the boy's arm. Unload our gear anyway, Frank called out as he turned to go. I'll see to this. The man led Frank to a small building and into an office. Inside, a stout, jovial-looking man sat at a little desk. He seemed to be engaged in a wrestling match with the typewriter in front of him, for he had grasped it by the roller in two big hands and was tugging first one way and then the other to move it. Hello, Cooper. Never could use one of these things. Smiling, Frank Hardy stepped forward. Allow me, sir. Turning to page 24. He pressed the lever that allowed the carriage to slide back and forth. Humph, the man grunted. Thanks, my boy. Who is this? He asked, turning to the man named Cooper. That young Hardy pilot, the one they're after for causing that near crash at Chicago. The man at the desk looked at Frank sympathetically. I'm sorry, son. This may mean your license, but we can't be too careful about air safety. Perceiving in a flash that someone had misrepresented the incident at Chicago, Frank declared, Sir, if you think I'm responsible for that near collision, you should get the real facts from Chicago. Why, that's where our information came from, by long-distance phone call. But not from anybody in authority, Frank insisted. And why wasn't the message teletyped? You have a point, son. We'll get in touch with Chicago at once. I'm Eugene Smith, manager of this airport at the moment. While Mr. Cooper, the FAA representative, was communicating with Chicago in another room, Frank explained to Mr. Smith that the three boys had come in search for Willard Grafton, who had disappeared in the desert nearby. About 3 months ago now, Mr. Smith nodded. Made quite a stir hereabouts. Never did find him, did they? No, and we believe there's someone who doesn't want him to be found either. Briefly, Frank told of the Bayport eavesdropper. I wouldn't be surprised if the false report you received about me is part of a plan to stop or at least hold up our investigation. Just then, a loud, disgruntled voice of Chet Morton was heard outside the office door. I don't care if the whole United States government is keeping him in there. I'm starving. I want to eat. There's a man after my heart, Mr. Smith chuckled. He called out heartily, Come in, boys. Frank, Joe, and Chet had packed their belongings in rucksacks which were more suitable for desert life than ordinary luggage. Now Joe came in bearing a neatly packed sack with his and Frank's things. Chet Morton followed with a bulging pack of his own. First he stumbled into the door, then he lurched against the door frame. Someone ought to repack that mule's load, commented the airport manager, his eyes twinkling. He shook hands all around. At that moment, Mr. Cooper, looking a great deal more friendly, returned. You're in the clear, he announced to Frank, turning to page 26. No one in authority at Chicago made that call. Why would anybody play such a dirty trick on you? A confusion of voices arose as Eugene Smith satisfied Cooper's curiosity, and Frank explained to Chet and Joe. Oh, Chet rubbed his head gingerly. I knew we hadn't seen the last of that guy who slugged me. When the boys emerged from the office, it was nearly 8 o'clock. The cloudless sky was a luminous blue. Up on the dry mountains, visible from across the desert, a shadow-filled draws looked like dark trickles of blue-black ink spilling down from the ridges. What a sky, Chet exclaimed enthusiastically. Somehow it looks bigger than it does back home. It's because the atmosphere is so clear, Frank commented. Soon, a sleek, cream-colored convertible drove up with Gene Smith at the wheel. Jump in, he called. I'll drive you into town. Rucksacks were stashed in the back seat, and Chet climbed in after them. Frank and Joe rode in front. As the car headed toward Blythe, where the boys would stay, the Hardy boys were surprised by the soft, warm air currents playing about their faces. Although it was nearly sundown, there was not a hint of moisture, not a trace of dew in the air. I thought the desert nights would be cool, Joe remarked. Not in the summer, Smith replied. On a night like this, you can sleep outdoors with no bedroll and not get a chill. Do you plan on sleeping in the desert? Later. We'll stay in town tonight, Frank answered. Then here's where you want to stay, Cooper said. The convertible turned into the driveway of an attractive new motel. The building itself was white and shaped like a horseshoe. The quivering blue water of the swimming pool danced in the open space, and now and then spray leaped into the air as someone dived. Let's camp here, Chet agreed, piling out of the car. They have a swell-looking restaurant. The boys took a room on the second floor, located in the curved section of the horseshoe. Lugging their rucksacks, they mounted the outside staircase. 10 minutes later, they were in the pool. After dressing, they enjoyed a dinner and satisfied even Chet's appetite. The next morning, Frank proposed that the boys visit the offices of the Daily Enterprise, Blythe's only newspaper, and read up on the Grafton story. Turning to page 28. According to Dad, two of the detective's best friends are the newspaper and the police, the young sleuth remarked. Later, after the three had studied clippings in the Enterprise's morgue, Joe said, Nothing new here, only that Grafton and Weatherby landed near the giant effigy outside Ripley. Where's their plane now? Chet asked. Let's see. Taken to Riverside County Airport by the authorities. We'll ask Gene Smith to let us look at it later, Frank suggested. Now, said Joe as they left the building, let's try the detective's other best friend, the police. Fenton Hardy's reputation as an investigator was known even to the small Blythe police force. The chief greeted Frank and Joe warmly, but could give little new information. You know about as much about Grafton as we do, he admitted. Weathersby once lived here in Blythe, but that doesn't prove anything either. Temporarily discouraged, the young sleuths strolled down Hobson Way, the town's main street, discussing the situation. Tell you what, Joe suddenly proposed to his brother. You'll be Willard Grafton, and Chet and I will be Clifford Weatherby. What? I mean, you pilot the plane, and Chet and I will be the passengers. We'll make the same flight they did. We'll see the same things from the air. We'll land in the same place. Maybe then we'll learn some answers. Let's hope we don't disappear the same way, Chet muttered. You'll never disappear, Chet, Frank needled. There's too much of you to hide. The stout boy made a pass in self-defense. What say we have lunch before we start? After a quick meal, the boys were driven by one of the motel employees to Riverside County Airport. The sun blazed upon the white building and bright-colored wing surfaces of the standing aircraft. Frank and Joe wore their comfortable, wide-brimmed hats, and Chet sported a new straw sombrero he had purchased. Phew, talk about heat, Chet complained. Do you know it's 108 degrees in this sun? I just checked the airport thermometer. Cheer up, Joe replied. I've read that the desert sands get as hot as 165 degrees, and we're in for some walking. Chet groaned. Why don't we go back to that nice motel and take a siesta? That's what the Mexicans do in this heat. Because of Willard Grafton, Frank reminded him. He may be in danger. After unlocking the plane, the boys waited for the air to circulate around the cabin, which was as hot as an oven. A few minutes later, the trim blue craft rose smoothly from the runway. Turning to page 30. Dipping one wing, Frank banked in a circle over the airport, then headed north for the desert giants. The boys enjoyed the scene beneath them. The Colorado River, as blue as the sky itself, was lined with beautiful yellow-leaved tamarask trees. On the Arizona side were the brown, rugged badlands, but the California side was a rich patchwork of growing crops. Each field was a different shade of green. "Say, I thought this was desert country," Chet marveled. "It was," Frank answered. "You're looking at the result of irrigation in this spot. See the little ditch lines? No better soil anywhere. All it needs is water." Further on, they spotted the desert effigies, and Frank dropped down for a landing not far from the knoll on which they had seen the lone giant. "Assuming this is where Grafton landed," Joe mused as they piled out of the plane, "what would he have done next?" "He'd probably have climbed up onto that knoll to look around," Frank suggested. "Come on." Eagerly, the young detective scrambled to the top of the steep bank to hunt for clues. "Let's just stand here a moment and get our bearings," Joe suggested when they'd reached the top. From where the boys stood, the area ahead of them was a dry, pebble-covered expanse and nothing more, with the exception of a small bush here and there. Not far from them, however, they noticed a wide dirt path. "Looks as if someone took a broom and swept a walk among the pebbles," Chet remarked. "Believe it or not, that's one of the giant's legs," Joe said. Frank looked thoughtfully. "I'm wondering," he said, "if these knolls aren't man-made. The ancient Indians could have built them and then drawn the effigies on the top." "You may be right, Frank," Joe replied. "It's a good theory, and the position of the giant may have meant something." The boys tramped around the knoll, gazing in every direction. "Look," said Joe, desperately seeking a clue. "If Grafton stood here, what would have caught his attention?" Suddenly, Frank, who stood near the left hand of the giant, gazing down at the desert, cried out, "There's something glinting over there." "What is it? A mineral?" Joe asked. "Let's find out," Frank urged, starting down the embankment. Joe and Chet, following close behind, saw Frank reach the desert floor and then suddenly skid to a halt and leap backward. "Look out!" he shouted warningly.